Welcome to Revenue Cycle Reframed, where Jetix Health interviews revenue cycle leaders across the country. Today, I'm excited to have with us Kelly Pearson. Kelly comes from the Director of Coding and CDI from MercyHealth. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Kelly, my first question I typically ask is this, how did you get into healthcare?
Yeah. Well, like many people who find themselves in the revenue cycle area, my path into coding wasn't something that I had purposely mapped out. I started out in claims processing and honestly thought I would stay there long term, but the company had relocated to downtown Chicago and the commute was far too long for me. So I transitioned part-time to a provider's office while I figured out what my next step would be. During that time, the provider sold his practice to a health system, and I was offered a position in their coding department. At the time, I had no idea what coding even was, but because I had experience in claims processing and provider billing, they had assured me that that would be a good fit for me. From there, my career really grew organically. I eventually figured out what coding was, which really felt kind of like learning a new language, but had the opportunity to work within different roles in the department. And it gave me really great exposure to all the areas within revenue cycle. So spent some time as a coder and then had great opportunity to move back over to the payer side where I supported claims editing and payment integrity processes. That experience gave me a completely different perspective on healthcare operations, and I found my time really valuable there.
The dark side, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not so dark when you're over there.
Oh.
Uh, Eventually, I had the opportunity to return back to MercyHealth as the Coding and CDI director. And that's where I've spent the last 4 years, focusing on operational leadership and technology initiatives. I think having that experience on both sides, it definitely has given me a unique perspective to the life cycle of a claim, how it's documented and coded, and ultimately how it will be reviewed and reimbursed.
Interesting. It's graduation season. People are graduating from either college or high schools. So if you look back at yourself when you were either that age of 18 or maybe coming out of college, and someone said 25 years, 30 years from now you're going to be a coder, and that's what you're going to do. What would you have said to yourself back then?
What is a coder? uh, but I knew I would be somewhere in business, and so having the technical piece of coding and also the business processes, that really fits for me best.
Oh, fantastic. So yeah, I think you're selling yourself just a little bit short of your career because what I've heard and had conversations with you about is about the capabilities that you've brought to Mercy Health and AI coding. And that's something I really want to dive into today because I think it's important to do. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you've done with AI coding and the capabilities of autonomous coding at Mercy?
Yeah, definitely. When I entered into my role, our team was really struggling with high demands in their work queues and the inability to make measurable improvements in the backlog. I was really fortunate that our VP of Revenue Cycle and our CEO had recognized fairly early on that we just couldn't hire enough experienced certified coders to keep pace with our current charge volumes and even the future growth of the health system. So we were looking to build a scalable coding model, and that's where we started getting into AI and what were the opportunities that were there for Mercy Health. It was a little bit of a trailblazing because there weren't a lot of health systems up on AI, and there wasn't a perfect roadmap. But we knew it would positively impact our pre-AR days, improve our throughput, and support staffing challenges.
in a sense, you took a pain point, right? A point where you don't have enough coders and you couldn't find coders. And especially in the 2020s during that time frame, there was not a lot of places to go search from. And you look for an opportunity there. And luckily for you, your leadership team was also in that forefront as well as thinking about it. If you were in the shoes of someone else looking at this saying, hey, this is my pain point as well, how would you go about telling them how to start the process, start the initiation phase of, maybe autonomous coding or AI coding is right for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to take a look at what's the problem you're trying to solve for. Autonomous coding can be incredibly valuable, but organizations, they need to understand what their primary goal is. For us, again, it was our pre-AR days and addressing those staffing challenges, which helped us define, what was our rollout strategy and what were we looking to accomplish. I also encourage leaders to have conversations with technology vendors early in the process, because those discussions can help organizations better understand implementation timelines. Who are the stakeholders involved? You have to make sure you have all the right departments and areas involved so that you have a solid rollout. And then also, one of the most important things is making sure that you're AI ready. And by AI ready to me means ensuring that you have strong documentation practices. It's truly the foundation for successful AI program. Even the most advanced technology depends on clear, accurate documentation to ensure that they're making the right coding decisions.
I think a saying that goes along with that is junk in, junk out, correct? And the capability of understanding is a documentation, correct? How did you know that you were ready for that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, the solution's only as good as the documentation. And so we spent a lot of time analyzing our documentation up front, understanding how the autonomous vendor would interact with that documentation. The solution can certainly accelerate workflows and improve efficiencies, but we had to know that the documentation's accurate and it's complete, and having some of that pre-go live testing to ensure that we were getting consistent logic across the board was really important to us. So we did some pre-live testing with our vendor. We saw the importance of striking the right balance of documentation practices where, if the documentation is lacking specificity, you're going to get downcoded, even though clinically it will support maybe a higher level. And then we also see it on the flip side where overly broad documentation or unnecessary documentation will cause upcoding and creates a risk there when it's misaligned with
Hmm.
medical necessity.
Interesting. You talked about before a little bit about project management, right? The capability to understand what it is. And before you even dive into a project like this, to really do kind of the initiation stage to understand, is it right for us? And you also talked about subject matter experts or individuals across the organization. Tell me, who did you have to help you, really take this from that project management stage of initiation, selecting which vendor to use. The second stage is, really defining what the project is. Who else did you have to engage in your organization to help you through the project management stages?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think engaging or having a successful team, you need to have both operational and technical expertise. It's important to have strong representation from coding, obviously, but you also need your compliance team, revenue integrity, IT, and operational leaders on board, because everyone's bringing a different perspective to how the organization is going to interact with the technology. I think having a dedicated project manager from a coding perspective is incredibly important.
Mm.
Someone will help drive those timelines, ensuring that coding logic decisions are documented well, and that they can manage the communication and ensure that both the internal team and the vendor is continuously aligned. In addition to that, I think it's extremely important to have physician and clinical champions that can play a major role in helping providers understand what's the initiative and how to build trust in that process.
Oh, that's a big one. The clinical providers. Tell me more about that. Tell us more. How did you find those individuals that would make the right partnership available for you and MercyHealth all together to make it work for the organization?
Yeah, I think it was providers that we knew had quality documentation, and they really understood coding practices. So we could interact with them on how was the tool reading their documentation, where were there some upcoding and downcoding that maybe wasn't just quite right, and that we could have those open conversations with them on if we tweak the documentation here or do this, how that would impact the AI. It also is really important to talk about the clinical intent of the visit as well, because one or two words can shift that visit in a direction that the clinician was not intending. So it's important to have those conversations with the provider so they really truly understand what their documentation or how their documentation is going to interact with the tool.
Kelly, I envision it as kind of to the point where, in a sense, it's kind of like a football game where you run a play, and that play was to get the clinicians involved to start realizing it. How did you go backwards afterwards to be able to give back the feedback either to the physicians to be able to say, okay, this documentation is, well, this is what the autonomous coding is picking up, or this is what it's missing here. How do we correct this issue in order so the next time it comes back in the correct manner? Tell me a little bit more about looking back after the play happened and Monday morning quarterbacking what just occurred from the autonomous agent, and then going back and looking at it and saying, is this right? Is this actually what it should have picked up in these documentation?
Yeah, so we have a layered audit process where we have our coders who are looking at the charges in real time. We have our auditors who are coming back on the back end, and then we also have a lot of data at our hands with the autonomous solution that shows us different provider trending and where there may be some outliers or opportunity for physician education. And I think in that trending report, that's where we can really start to drill down where a provider may have some issues. It gives us an idea. Is a provider always going from, a level 3 service to a level 4, or being downcoded the opposite way? And the coders can take those specific examples and identify where there's gaps or issues in documentation, and then they can have that very specific conversation with the provider of you're missing some criteria in prescription drug management, maybe you're not documenting your chronic conditions correctly. Having that specific education and then being able to label the impact of what's happening on as their charges go through the automation, it really gives them an idea of where they can make those changes and make big impact to their charging.
It's interesting because most clinicians in most medical schools do not go through an environment to teach them coding. So in a sense, this is also really probably broadening their scope and eyes as well sometimes that they may not have seen because they can actually look at the data themselves. How have you found that impactful for the physicians as well?
Yeah, I think for Mercy, we're very lucky that our physicians do understand coding. They all code their own clinic charges, and and then coding will come through and validate and provide that education and whatnot. So we're already a step ahead, I think, because they do have that coding knowledge. Now it's getting into the finer details that maybe nobody has addressed before because they couldn't see it on a large scale of data. So, again, going back to that prescription drug management, really digging into those very specific criteria of one or two words can make the provider, miss out on that level 4 E&M because prescription drug management wasn't documented just so. So it's a great back and forth with our physicians, but it is just providing them a little bit more information to make sure that we're billing compliantly.
Well, that's fantastic. Anything else that we should be taking away from not only the project itself, but overall the politics of installing something that's very new to the organization that never been installed before?
Yeah, I think, thinking about metrics and, what type of or what areas you need to look at to ensure that the tool is, being utilized to its fullest potential. For me, the most meaningful measurements of the autonomous solution was, monitoring coding accuracy through our quality audits, watching denial trends, documentation quality, and that provider trending and all that data. And then overall coding performance, looking at DNFB coding days and pre-AR days. I think it's also really important to track how much manual intervention is still required when exceptions or escalations are occurring. Those trends help us identify opportunities for workflow improvement or coding logic refinement.
Let's talk about QA a little bit, because one of the things that go along with any autonomous or AI capabilities is making sure it's operating as intended, because everyone knows there's times when it goes off and speaks its own mind that really that's not what you really wanted it to do. So tell us how you managed that QA process, because I'm sure there was one behind it, and how you really took the coders that understood this, the benefit of actually installing something along these lines as well.
Yeah, ensuring coding quality and compliance was one of our most important components of the rollout strategy. We approached it with a layered audit model rather than just letting the AI run free and do its thing. We rolled out at go live 100% review of all of our providers and any new specialties. Our team had to validate not only the accuracy, but how is the tool functioning with the provider's documentation, ensuring that provider epic templates were appropriate and that they were being read accurately. In addition to that, we also review a percent of charges that go through our quality review work queue, and this allows the team to maintain ongoing oversight and monitor trends in real time. And then, as I spoke about, we also have the provider review document where they can look at provider performance over the past month and identify areas for opportunity that way. For our leadership team, it was never about removing oversight, from a coder perspective, but instead creating a scalable process where we had strong governance and continuous monitoring built into the daily workflows.
So, Kelly, any one of our listeners who would want to implement an autonomous coding program, what mistakes did you make that you would say, if I were to do it again, this would be something I want to do over with? Can you give us anything that takeaways that you took from the installing this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first one that I already spoke about was having the dedicated coding project manager. About 4 months in, we determined that there was a slight coding tweak we needed to make in the logic, and trying to identify when that decision was made, who made it. We were working backwards a bit, and we realized that we're always going to have, maybe a slight, coding issue or, a coding logic issue, but we need to make sure that we're documenting our decisions and that the entire leadership team is approving those decisions so that we can move forward as a team. So we did implement the dedicated coding project manager. She also keeps us accountable for moving the project forward and ensuring that we're making decisions on time and aligned with the vendor. The other one is getting the providers on board earlier. I don't think that an organization can do it early enough. Having provider advocates on board to help promote the project, really get the providers to understand the why behind it, and that there are safeguards in place, and we're there to not only support the organization as a whole, but to keep the providers safe and compliant in their charging.
So you're an earlier adopter, I would say, in many instances in regards to autonomous coding. 3 to 5 years from now, if you say, what is it going to look like, do you think, in the healthcare space in regards to autonomous coding?
Yeah, I love this question because I've actually had a couple conversations with people about this over the past few weeks, and some of them outside of revenue cycle, believe it or not. But I think, autonomous coding will mature and expand, but the industry will also become more realistic about where automation works best and where human expertise is still essential. You know, autonomous coding, it will be highly effective in high volume, low complexity
Mm.
cases, but at the same time, organizations still need to rely on experienced coders to review those high complexity areas, to provide that provider education, and ultimately do AI governance. So I think the role of the coding professional has to evolve. Instead of spending time on manual code assignments, we'll see more focus on quality validations, data analytics, and provider education. The AI can't do that human decision making, especially in healthcare coding, because it's so nuanced, but it can improve efficiencies. So the human expertise will help maintain that oversight and decision making.
So it's really leveling up those individuals that still are there to help the organization. So really moving them to more complex or the emotional intelligence to have a conversation with the provider to help them get to a place that needed for the organization as well. Is that a fair statement from
Yeah,
that perspective? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So now, someone that's looking to do this, what advice would you give to them that is brand new, maybe a legger to installing autonomous coding? What advice would you give to them today in how to not only prepare potentially their leadership team, but also the second part is to prepare their organization for an install of a program like this?
Yeah, I think it goes back to identifying what is the primary issue that you're trying to solve for. How is autonomous coding going to help your organization? You have to have executive buy-in, and so what is that problem? How will autonomous coding fix that, and how will you scale that up and make it a foundational implementation for your organization? Uh, you know, it really it's important to get the a cross-functional team together and ensure that people are looking at it from different perspectives. I think along the way um, you try to assess what's the impact, what are some of the long-term issues that we're going to encounter, but you can't possibly think of everything. So trying to get that cross-functional team together and identify issues along the way so that you can be proactive rather than reactive.
Well, Kelly, I truly appreciate our time together today and talking about autonomous coding. If there's one piece of advice you want to leave the audience with today before we end, what would it be on autonomous coding?
Oh, I think it goes back to being AI ready and having strong documentation practices. That really is the foundation of the entire solution. Assessing where your documentation is today, making sure that your providers understand their levels of service and the importance of, specificity and documentation. All of that will make the solution or the implementation process run much more smoothly.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. We're excited to share this with our audience, and we hope you guys all have a fantastic day, everyone. Take care.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye.